Welcome to Communion and Shalom.
In this podcast, we are exploring how the biblical and historic Christian faith can engage sexuality, ethnicity, culture, and our local communities as we pursue the flourishing of God's kingdom. Our goal is to engage these topics charitably and with nuance.
Today we're talking with Nate Collins, the founding president of Revoice. Revoice, if you don't know, is a ministry with a mission to support and encourage gay, bisexual, same-sex attracted, or other queer Christians, as well as those who love them, so that all in the church might be empowered to live with gospel unity and live out the historic Christian doctrine of marriage and sexuality. Nate has a Master's of Divinity and a PhD from Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, and is the author of 2 books on the topics of faith, gender, and sexuality. Nate is gay or same-sex attracted, and he has been married to his wife Sarah for 20 years, what we would call a mixed orientation marriage. We're looking forward to sharing Nate's story with you today, as well as encouraging listeners who are new to this space to consider going to the Revoice conference this summer. Side note, if you're going to Revoice in 2024, come visit TJ and I at our workshop on rediscovering kinship beyond marriage. We would love to talk to you. Okay, on to the episode. Hello and welcome to Communion Shalom. This is David Frank. I'm here with my co-host TJ.
Hi, everyone.
And our special guest today is Nate Collins. Welcome, Nate.
Hey, good to be here.
So today is really just a time to interview Nate for him to share about Revoice and some of the history behind that, as well as just the opportunity to, ask him a lot of different questions. So let's get rolling. And Nate, you want to start out with just a general introduction of who you are apart from Revoice?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm a husband to my wife, Sarah. We've been married for almost 20 years. Our 20th anniversary is in 2 months. I'm a dad to 3 kids. I'm a gardener, very avid gardener. I am a musician. I like to play piano. I'm picking up the organ. I've always had a lifelong dream to be my church organist. And our current organist is retiring, and so they're going to pay for lessons for me.
Cool.
And I'm really enjoying that.
Wow.
Yes, that's a quick snapshot.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, thank you.
Are you originally from the Midwest?
No, my parents, I was born in Texas.
Okay.
My parents are Texans. I'm technically a Texan. But we moved overseas. My parents were missionaries after they were in Texas for a while.
Oh, we're overseas.
So I actually, a little country called Suriname.
Okay.
Has anybody heard of that?
Yes, I have.
It's in South America. Not many people know about it, but it's this tiny little country in South America, and I was there from when I was 8 to 18. So, quite a bit.
I'm curious, were some of your processings around sexuality in that context?
No.
Okay.
I was deeply in the not out to myself. I was aware of just emerging sexuality and feeling not like the other kids, and but it was a third world country, deeply westernized, but still not nearly the access to the kind of resources that we have today. I mean, largely through the internet, I guess. So maybe it's third world country, also pre-online.
Yeah.
So there was nothing to begin integrating that part.
And so you, missionary background, and I think you said Baptist before maybe we pressed record. Come from, is that right?
Yeah. No, I grew up Southern Baptist. My dad has drawn a paycheck from a Southern Baptist entity my entire life. Southern Baptist missionary. My parents were Southern Baptist missionaries for the 10 years we were in Suriname.
So, well, maybe can you elaborate both on, how that shaped not just your maybe hindrance to thinking about your sexuality or coming out to yourself, but also just generally, like, what were the strengths and weaknesses of how that cultivated your faith?
I really don't think it deeply impacted me as much as it could have if I had been in the States.
Mm-hmm.
In the context that we were in, the missionary community was pretty large, and most of them were not Southern Baptist missionaries. There were a lot of Wycliffe Bible translating people, and like maybe 5 or 6 other agencies that had as many missionaries as we did. And so I did not grow up like bubbled into this, Southern Baptist world. It was very much a community with all the other expats who were in the capital city there. And even, I went to college at Moody Bible Institute in Chicago. And again, there I was the only. It's a very non-Southern Baptist place, if you know anything about that school. That Southern Baptists have their institutions all around the country. There's their undergraduate universities, and so a lot of people, Southern Baptists, end up going there. And me going to Moody, just did not have that baggage.
Oh yeah.
It came later. I made up for it with for lost time, but.
Sure.
I did not have that cultural baggage in terms of, having it be a hindrance to just processing my sexuality. That started in earnest in college once I got to Moody, and just began thinking deeply about theology and doctrine, and also coming to terms with my own experience, beginning to share more openly about that with friends, and being Southern Baptist growing up didn't hinder me as much. It was the adult years of Southern Baptist life that were rough.
Yeah, I see.
Is the context that you grew up in Suriname? Was that? I mean, was that what's the question I'm looking for? Yeah, just like, what did it feel really natural to continue in your faith and like go to Moody? Was there any crisis points of faith, and or do you feel like you've kind of from the cradle just like known the love of the Lord?
Yeah, I guess it's a credit to my parents' parenting. I never, even though I knew that my orientation was not straight. I would not have used the word gay back then, but I had never heard the really toxic theology that being gay meant that God did not love you, or was a sign that God had handed you over. Sort of those really awful misinterpretations of Romans 1. I had never been exposed to any of that, and then on top of that, I just had a fairly vibrant devotional life as a teenager, even. Not like crazy, but like I just never doubted God's love for me. And I remember in college, especially, going through a really tough season of just wondering, is God real? Is God real? And is my faith real? Is it something that's actually valid? And that was probably been the only sort of existential faith crisis that I've had.
I feel like we're always due for at least one existential crisis in our life. I'm always a little questionable towards people who never have at least one.
Well, I had at least one back then, and turning 40 was another one. So,
do you want to share a little bit more of what that looked like in Moody to come to terms with faith and sexuality, both how you think about that and also how that relates to where that led to you being married?
Yeah. So, in terms of just integrating faith and sexuality and the way we think about that, I've been all over the map in terms of the way I've thought of my own experience, shared about my own experience even. I never went to like an Exodus ministry in the sense of like wanting to go to Exodus to go be straight.
Was that part of Moody's culture that would be like something they would point people to? Or was that not even there?
It wasn't even on their radar. No.
Okay.
No. I don't think I had even discovered it at that point. For me, like in terms of marriage, I wanted to be married. I wanted, but like part of it was I just wanted to be normal, and that's what being normal is being married. And it just so happens that I actually met a woman that I ended up falling in love with, and that led to the emergence of what I would call a one-woman orientation that sort of functions side by side with my gay orientation that's always there.
Sure.
So yeah, that's pretty much how that emerged. I met Sarah our first week at school at Moody. Moody requires every student to do a weekly ministry, and your first semester you have no idea what the options are, and so they assign it for you. And it turns out it was just me and her on Friday nights taking the public transit out to a church 45 minutes away from campus and doing English as a second language training at a church. And so we both sort of got to know each other really well that first semester, and then began dating a year and a half after that. I came out to her that summer. And at that point, we are each other's really close friends already. And at that point, we were both already in love. She was in love with me. I was in love with her. And figured, let's just continue trying this, and let's see if God is faithful, he will make it clear what we're supposed to do. And so that led to engagement and marriage. And a lot of folks who are in mixed orientation marriages and they're healthy, there's a lot of common threads. One of them being disclosure of disorientation before marriage, so that the wife is fully aware of things going into things, or the husband if it's a lesbian woman. And then there's got to be this resoluteness to not make sexuality the central part of your marriage, in the sense of like this it being this thing that you're always constantly focusing on. I think most healthy mixed orientation marriages, they have their own unique struggles, but they also look quite a bit like other regular marriages. So I don't know how we got onto marriage. You asked a question about marriage.
No. That's right in, because a lot of people either are very confused about a mixed orientation marriage, or some people find the term offensive. I have a housemate who was very suspicious, but from the perspective of, like, well, isn't that just setting up your marriage to fail? And
that term is what you mean?
Not because of calling it that, but because of the reality of like having a sexual orientation contrary to your spouse. And so you describe yours as a one-woman orientation. Do you know mixed orientation marriages? Or, I mean, I maybe I don't have a clear question here, but I feel like sexual orientation language is helpful, but people can also be overly deterministic of thinking that, like, because you're only same-sex attracted, gay, lesbian, that's the only way your sexuality will work. Do you have any words to just how lived experience is a little more complex than that?
Well, I think what we're bumping up against is the reality that sexuality can be kind of fluid. This doesn't mean I'm encouraging everybody to go out and explore the fluidity of their sexuality, but just means in reality, sexuality is related to a lot of different other areas of what it means to be human, including just relational intimacy in general. And so, so for me, I was not attracted to my wife in any way, in terms of sexually or physically, when we first met. But I did feel that she was a beautiful person externally, and then as I got to know her, also internally. And then as we began dating, began to be more emotionally connected with each other, and that reinforced this bond that was developing between us. The more committed we realized we felt for each other, the more we were talking about spirituality and our relationship with God, and eventually it began to be, thinking about our relationship with each other going before God. And as these things are happening, I'm just realizing that bond is tighter and tighter. And at some point, it felt inevitable that it would be sexual, and that there would be a sexual overtone to it. And that's actually what happened. And so that's when I was like, okay, this could work. And that's a lot of times for mixed orientation marriages how it develops. There's not this, oh, I want to go be in a straight marriage, and so I'm going to find a woman or find a man and just make it work. It's the right person comes along that God has prepared for you to be mutually helpful to each other in your spiritual walk.
That inevitability piece, I think, is on both. We have a recent guest who might not get, I don't know the publishing order, might not release actually before this releases, with Tim Otto, that from a side A perspective, that inevitable, like, spiritual, emotional intimacy would, of course, lead to sexual intimacy. So how is being side B, he thought, kind of like Gnostic, of like, you can have intimacy in all these ways, but you just got to stop the wall here. But then also from
in a partnership or pair relationship.
And then from the kind of more conservative, or just our historic kind of homophobic, that they're afraid of any same-sex intimacy, even regardless of your orientation, because it's just like, isn't intimacy always going to inevitably lead to sexual intimacy? I don't know how you parse through some of that inevitability, and what the implications of that are for other forms of intimacy.
Maybe inevitability is overstating it, because you don't know for sure. But there is that, I guess it's more of a possibility. And there's also, just because something may feel more or less inevitable doesn't mean that it's good. And so, so for, an affirming person who would say, well, if you're just growing in depth of intimacy with somebody, and even just with one person that you're really committed to, the fact that sexual intimacy might inevitably play a role does not necessarily mean that it should. If we have beliefs about what, boundaries around sexual expression, all these kinds of things that we think are taught in Scripture. I was just talking about it in the sense of how a gay person might find themselves in the position of actually loving an opposite sex person the way that they would normally only love a same sex person.
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Kind of a non-answer to the question, but
I think it does. I think I love hearing your story, but and at the same time, I also sometimes think that it can be hard to sometimes for like a queer person, gay, whatever, lesbian, etc., who that doesn't happen for, but they can still be pressured to marry nonetheless.
Absolutely.
And that, and I definitely think mixed orientation marriages are a good thing. Like, they can be good, they can be healthy marriages. But it's still, not all people get there. They don't get there because of what the possibility never emerges. But some people just don't. There never seems to be any opening in their own experience of sexuality at the same time.
And that's why it's absolutely got to be coupled with this idea that flourishing does not require marriage. And like, for every gay person who would like to see themselves in an opposite sex marriage, there might be 5 others who have no desire for an opposite sex. Like, there's just, and that's completely fine. And then the question then is, well, then what are we doing as a church to make flourishing actually plausible for any person in that circumstance? And also, like, it's important to remember just the reality of the devastation that gay people entering into mixed orientation marriages
thinkingly has played. It's just been a really.
I assume you've had friends or friendly acquaintances or whatever that you've seen that were in mixed orientation marriages that might have failed. Have you seen that in your circles at different points?
Absolutely, yeah. I remember one season, I guess at this point it's probably around 10 years ago. It seemed like 3 of my gay friends who are in mixed orientation marriages, I think their marriage fell apart like within 3 or 4 in the space of like 5 or 6 months, it seemed.
Do you have any
so that was really.
Do you have any ideas of what can be avoided that may have happened, even though some of it can't be avoided necessarily? But I don't know if you have any themes from that.
Well, there's just this. There can be what I've seen. Just there can be an unwillingness to adequately live in the light, so that like marriage is stressful enough.
Yeah.
Add the stress of being a gay person and not being honest. That's a lot of pressure, and I've just seen a lot of people do just really cope with that in really unhealthy ways that are inherently damaging to any relationship, but especially to marriage. So yeah, in my own life and the life of friends that I have that are in mixed orientation marriages, it's really just critical to live transparently with your friends, with your spouse. That's just really important.
I was going to ask, did you also go through marriage counseling as part of your marriage? Marriage preparation, that is. But
we did premarital counseling. That's right. Yep.
Did you talk about having different sexual orientations? And if you did the person tell you like don't do this, or okay, we'll deal with that? What was the situation?
It was 20 years ago. I was telling David that it was 20 years ago. I remember telling the person ahead of the sessions, and then it never really came up.
Oh, okay.
At one point I brought it up because I thought, I think I told you, did you miss the memo?
Yeah.
We should address this. And for better or worse, they didn't.
Okay.
In hindsight, I'm not a therapist or counselor or anything, but I think I would have done it a little different, just because I think there's some, even just basic education, I think that should we should be making sure people are aware of.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Hey.
I mean, like most couples our age, we have been through seasons of marriage therapy ourselves. It's been really helpful. I highly recommend it. No stigma, no shame. So, yeah.
So it sounds like you entered as you got older, you started entering the conversation of faith and sexuality when you were married already as a gay person.
Yeah.
Is that right?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I came out in 2000. So we got married in 2004, and I came out in 2006 or 7. I always forget which which year it was.
Yeah.
And it mostly was because I just got tired of coming out to people individually, and I just really wanted to be out and done with it. Discovered after the fact that if you pass as straight, people will just assume you're straight, even if they've heard otherwise. So that was really frustrating. So I came out, and I used the narrative back then of, I'd been married for a couple of years at that point. Was that a sort of phase in the way I experienced my sexuality of not really experiencing much same-sex sexuality. I think a lot of it was, some of it was still, repressed. But also I was having sex with my wife and enjoying it. And so there's a sense in which like that was the same-sex part sort of got receded into the back a little bit. It was on the back burner. And so I did, without intending to, because I hadn't really been exposed to Exodus or anything. But if I, listened to the way I shared my story back then, I probably would have shared it, not as in the sense that the same-sex desires were completely gone or
away, but that they had resolved
Oh yeah.
and had been just not a big part of my daily experience. That has since ebbed and flowed, I've discovered.
Okay.
20 years, of life since then. It got to the point where I realized, no, I'm still very much gay. I just need to see how Sarah is with me calling myself gay. And I remember asking her at one point, and she's like, well, that's what I've been telling my friends.
Oh. There you go.
So, I mean, that helped with that adjustment for me internally, because I had gone from, when I came out to my dad at 19, I don't remember this, but he says the words I used were, Dad, I think I'm a homosexual.
Okay.
So that was in 1999.
Yeah.
So I went from that to, struggling with homosexuality, and then, struggling with same-sex attraction. And now it's not a struggle. It's just I experienced same-sex attraction. And then it's like, well, just call yourself gay, Nate.
There you go.
And that's when I asked Sarah.
So when did you start entering into like some of these larger conversations with other people around sexuality?
So I went to seminary after college, and pretty soon in seminary realized I wanted to pursue doctoral work. And so beginning in 2010 or 2011, I don't remember, started a PhD in New Testament, and the plan at that point was to go on and teach New Testament as Bible college or seminary, but also be involved in sort of these side conversations about faith and sexuality. And so my dissertation was not specifically on issues related to initially it wasn't intended to be on sexuality, but I ended up writing conference papers that I would present at these academic conferences on topics related to sexuality. And so did a lot of some of my more early public thinking on that topic. And just was really intrigued by the potential for some really fruitful, creative ways to think about orientation, like theologically about orientation. What is orientation theologically? How does these patterns of the sexual experience relate to what it means to be human? Are there ways to talk doctrinally about the phenomenon of orientation? And so, began doing that mostly in the academic world, starting in 2011, 2012 or so. And, that led to, meeting publishers at conferences, and then getting a contract to write a book. And so my first book was released in 2017. And, that was sort of, I was in the middle of my PhD writing that book. And so I was very much in the academic world, very much ideas. And that's sort of the culmination in some senses of that phase of life for me. Kind of a rambling answer. Sorry about that.
No problem. At this point, had you already connected with the other Christian groups that are talking about this, like GCN? I think at that point, maybe it was QCF. I don't remember when they.
Yeah. It was GCN first. Okay. So the history of that for me, like I said, I had not been involved in Exodus, in terms of looking for help. Probably around 2010 or 11, I connected with a local Exodus ministry in Louisville, Kentucky, where I was in seminary. And the idea for me then, the motivation was more, I just want to know what ministry on the ground in this area looks like. I'm not necessarily needing that help and support myself, but I'm just curious, what's it look like to minister in this space? And so that was really eye-opening in some ways, especially in hindsight. And that led to sort of I guess it was really a fast tracking in some ways of Exodus involvement. For one reason or another, ended up getting connected with the leadership of Exodus, and right as it was attempting to basically course correct away from reparative therapy. And so that's when I sort of came into the more national level conversation on these things. And, I was one of the people that knew first that Alan Chambers, the last president of Exodus, was going to shut Exodus down. The reason being, we tried to change it away from orientation change. There's so much resistance. Let's just burn the whole thing down, basically.
Yeah.
And so it was sort of in those behind the scenes conversations when that happened in 2013. And then, so the last Exodus conference was in 2013. And then I went to my first GCN conference that next January. So January of 2014.
Oh, wow.
And there were a lot of folks that may not have been in Exodus circles, but for whatever reason were side B and ended up at that particular GCN. And there was virtually there might have been one, I think there was one workshop for side B folks, but it was very much not a side B space at all. And so that became the closing of Exodus, I feel, left a void. And then what happened is you saw the polarization deepen. You had a lot of folks just completely just become affirming. And then on the right, not necessarily among gay people, but on the right, sort of the straight church, there was a lot of deep thinking about sexuality, but in ways that were not informed by non-straight experience. And so it was actually done in some really harmful ways. And a lot of it was actually the institution I was in seminary at, Southern Seminary in Louisville, Kentucky. And, that's where my Southern Baptist baggage begins. So yeah, there was just this deepening void of what does it look like to not be straight, but to be gay, and then to be faithful, and not just faithful, but to actually flourish. And there didn't seem to be any visible pathways being, that the church was pointing us to or creating. And that was a problem.
Because at that point, the church that you were in, or the church circles you were in, they were mostly still sort of like involved with Exodus and Side X sort of thinking. That's still the mindset at that point.
Yeah, I mean, Exodus was around for so long, and the mindset of if you follow the right steps of spiritual growth, this will resolve itself, and you will become normal. That's just that became the air we breathed as evangelical Christians, and especially in places that were also deeply homophobic. And so that was what we were working against.
Another question I have, I've been wondering this about side B history a lot. In that first GCN meeting where you said there was an unusual confluence of a lot of side B people, were most of them side B coming from side X sort of thinking and mindsets, or were some of them not in that path? They were doing their own thing, kind of not Exodus, not side X, but something else?
Yeah, I don't know. I think a lot of them, some of them were Exodus type, former Exodus types, who were not as, culturally homophobic. In terms of internalized homophobia. But they just found themselves at Exodus conferences. There were a decent number of people, though, who did not really feel like they belonged at Exodus because they sensed the internalized homophobia that was there. But they weren't affirming. They were traditionalist in their doctrine, and so they just didn't have anywhere to go. And those historically have always been the folks that have been drawn to GCN, now QCF, who are traditionalists. Is we want to be honest about our experience and the fact that it's probably going to be there the rest of our lives, no matter what XYZ spiritual growth we attain. And so, for whatever reason, I don't know. I hadn't been at previous GCN, so there might not have been that many more. I just know that was my first in-person gathering of other people like me who were not side X and were not, even, SSA types. They were, I'm gay. And
So what drew you to
probably-
that particular meeting, do you think, from what you can tell?
I was curious, really.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I was curious. I actually, yeah. So there's that one, and then my second GCN I went to was in 2016, and I actually taught a workshop on mixed orientation marriage, and because they invited me to, they asked me to. That was another experience altogether. But yeah, it was just interesting. I mean, I feel like there are better places for side B folks to end up than at GCN. I'll just leave it at that. Good people there.
Did you call it a mixed orientation marriage at that point?
Oh yeah,
Okay.
yeah. No, that workshop was interesting because it was like the blurb was specifically worded to, if you want to meet more people who are in circumstances like yours and hear how our marriage has worked out for us, then come here. In reality, only one other couple was in the room.
Okay.
Everybody else was either there just because they were curious or because they had been in a mixed orientation marriage, and what they really needed was a divorce recovery workshop.
Got it.
So that was a really miserable Q&A session. I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah.
I bet.
Just all the baggage and trauma and stuff coming out.
It was obvious there was a lot of pain and trauma in that room. But yeah, anyway.
Yeah, and it's especially when you hear those stories, I've just been reflecting a lot on how much we want to have like the monolithic gay story and so whenever you just like hear a compelling of like, oh, if a gay person gets married, it's going to be traumatic, or look, that person's was nice, so it's going to be that way. And
absolutely,
just life is much more complex than that, and we want simple narratives. And how do we push against that narratives?
Yeah, but to get back to your question about sort of the history piece of things, after that, the first GCN that I went to in 2014, a lot of us realized at the time we don't really have anything in terms of a place to go, a community to meet and gather, or even an online space. And so it was in the month after that 2014 GCN that the Side B Facebook community popped up.
Yeah.
And so I was one of the first folks in there. I remember one person reached out to me and asked, "Are you gay, or were you just at GCN for fun?" Like, no, I'm okay, because we got a group of people that we were putting in a Facebook group we want to put together who don't know each other, and we want to sort of get to know each other. And so that's how that Facebook group started.
Okay. You're confusing everyone because you're married. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So did that become, I assume that became then the central Side B hub from 2014 in the U.S. Like that was the place
In terms of community, yeah. The community hub really became that Facebook group. In terms of the for lack of a better term, the intellectual hub, that would be the Spiritual Friendship blog.
Yeah.
The Spiritual Friendship blog was very active at that point. So there's a lot of online discussion, commenting on threads, and the Spiritual Friendship blog it was not the first Side B blog. There were several anonymous sort of Side B authors that would blog anonymously that were in the years leading up to Spiritual Friendship launching. And so there's this history of the blog format being really formative for the way we think about just being honest about our orientation and also traditionalist in our understanding of sexual ethics.
Yeah, it was formative for me. Spiritual Friendship was the blog that I hit upon, which helped me process my faith and sexuality so much. So it has like a special place in my heart. Even though now, sadly, it seems kind of defunct as of now. Even though it still exists on the internet. You can find it.
Yeah. It hasn't been very active.
Yeah. So at what point did you and maybe others, I'm not sure, What point did you guys start talking about developing Revoice as another sort of communal gathering space for Side B people?
Yeah. So, in 2017, I finished my PhD, spring of 2017, and kind of entered a it wasn't dark, but it was very, I didn't know what was next. I had just experienced some really, well, yeah, I don't want to, there's legal issues, so I don't want to use the wrong words, but I had a bad experience at my seminary regarding my employment. Let's put it that way. And so I just really did not have much hope that there was a school out there that would hire me to teach. And also on top of that, the job market for PhDs in New Testament was just awful. And even folks who did get a job, it took a couple of years of job searching to land at, and I just couldn't put my family through that. And so I did what one does and got a job at Starbucks to pay the bills. And was just really wrestling with, what's next, God. Sarah, the biggest thing was I needed a paycheck. And so there wasn't going to be this well, let's just go start a ministry and raise support. That wasn't going to work. And so one of the things that happened to sort of jumpstart things was this document called the Nashville Statement was released in August of 2017.
Oh, is that long ago?
And
I forgot.
It is that long ago, yeah.
It's a while.
We've come a long way.
Yeah.
And it had limited impact in terms of the broad scope of Christendom, but in terms of those of us who are really plugged into our conservative doctrinally conservative theological spaces, it was devastating because so many people signed it. And didn't realize that there were parts of it that were just really exclusionary and just wrong and bad. And so it really devastated a lot of our community. And about a month into it, I was at a friend's house. About a month after it was released, I was at a friend's house and just talking about the devastation and the pain and just the need for belonging. And he was like, well, Nate, why don't you just throw a conference? It's like, just call all your friends that you've networked with over the years and say, hey, here are the dates. Will you just show up and love on and teach and worship with our people, our community? And I was like, okay, let me think about that. I was like, Sarah's not going to go for it. So I came home and told her, and she was like, oh, that's really interesting. And then about a week later, I was on my lunch break at Starbucks, and she called me, and she's a therapist, and she had a private practice that she had pulled back from when we had our third kid, and so at that point she would not work for maybe about 2 years or so, and she said, "How about I go back to work? How about you work part-time instead of full-time, and you plan this conference?"
Wow.
And I was like, okay, let's give it a shot. So, I mean, one thing led to another, got connected to all the people. Couldn't have done this on my own, obviously. Massive team effort. It's been like that every year. But that's basically how Revoice got started. As I began thinking and praying through whether that was something that God wanted, I reach out to people, and folks like Wes Hill and Ron Belgal and Preston Sprinkle, and just basically had asked them two questions: is this a legit need, and am I the person to spearhead this thing? And everybody was like, yeah, it definitely seems like a yes to both. And so that led to sort of where we are now. It's been a wild ride.
Yeah. So this is year number 6.
We're coming up on conference number 7.
Conference number 7.
Okay.
Yeah. So there's 18, 19, 20 was virtual, 21, 22, 23, 24,
Okay.
7.
Oh, yeah.
So, 7's a holy number. What are you excited about for conference number 7?
I didn't even realize that. That's awesome. This is our holy number conference.
Yes, indeed.
It's wow, man. Yeah, so in terms of just this year, I think one of the most amazing things to think about is, we've been through some transition in terms of our leadership. I've always been president, but we had an executive director with Becca Mason, and then just had a season of transition. Financially, things have been rough sometimes, and ended up having just an amazing provision of God for this overlap in having our new executive director, Michelle Sanchez, join our team.
Mm-hmm.
She's someone who has been involved in this conversation for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
She was a former leader, denominational leader with the Evangelical Covenant Church. And she recently joined our team as our executive director, and it's been amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're really excited about this year. The theme this year is masterpiece, and just really centering on the idea of beauty and the beauty of what our lives are looking like as God is renewing them and leading us into flourishing. If you've ever been to a Revoice conference, you know that it's just, there's just a lot of joy in that room.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of the things that I'm struck with every year. It's just a lot of joy. So yeah, lots to be excited about.
Yeah.
We just released our workshops. We moved back to a workshop format last year and really enjoy that. And so we're doing that again. It's at a brand new venue for us. We've never been at this location where we're going to be, and it's pretty posh, I think.
Oh yeah.
So it's in Columbus. Of all places, you wouldn't expect it, but it's pretty nice.
A straight friend of mine is really looking forward to go to Revoice this year because of the worship. She's just like,
Yep.
Yeah.
the worship, the singing. It's also exuberant.
Yeah.
Forget the speakers and the workshops and the actual. It's just like, let's just worship Jesus
Yeah.
together.
Oh, one of my core memories from last year is just this spontaneous night of worship that sort of erupted around the piano at the conference last summer. Greg Coles was playing piano, and there were probably about 30 or 40 of us just standing around and singing, and some folks had their instruments out there playing along. So it was really meaningful. Yeah.
What is the spiritual fruit that you see in Revoice that keeps you going?
I would have to say the word hope. I see, like, hope can feel costly to experience. You don't want to let yourself hope in some things if they seem too good or too unattainable or too much out of your own experience. And for gay people who adhere to a traditional sexual ethic, it feels like, in my experience and what I've seen, it feels like the struggle is just to eke by. And, the idea that you could actually flourish and be happy is just seems foreign. And so what I've seen Revoice do is just give hope for people to continue carrying on and to actually see that it is possible to find these spaces where life can be full and you can flourish. So yeah, I've seen that in terms of the fruit, in terms of people discovering something like Revoice for the first time, and then seeing that kind of life is possible. People thinking that they were the only ones and that there was no one else like them. It's still funny in this internet age. You think that people don't experience that, but they do. All the time. People think that they're the only one. There couldn't be anybody possibly like them. And so it's extremely meaningful, you can imagine, for someone like that to show up to a room full of hundreds.
Yeah.
And the conversations, a lot of, oh, you too as well. This is you, not just me, this is you. Like, that happens all the time.
For our listeners who haven't yet registered for Revoice, because hopefully most of you already have. Do you have a promo code that
I do have a promo code. Thank you for asking. It's Revoice Pod, Revoice POD. That'll get you $10 off registration.
Is Revoice
so not a lot,
capitalized?
but
Just as a question.
you know what? I had that same question myself, and the person who made the code didn't know. So,
Okay. So try capitalized or not?
try capital R, Revoice POD, or all lowercase, or all uppercase. I'm sorry, I should have figured that out.
No worries.
And we'll include that in the show notes, and maybe we'll have it correct there. Okay, we've kind of touched on your mixed orientation marriage a bit, but there's this conflict within the big family of God around kind of like what is it, the different basically accusations against side B that it's mandating celibacy. And I'll just speak from the conservative side. There's obviously an affirming side of it too, but it's from the more reparative therapy or ex-gay kind of like, oh, side B is mandating celibacy for gay people. And there's this tension. Well, I'm always confused. I'm like, Nate Collins is married. Like, I don't think he'd be mandating celibacy for everybody. But nonetheless, there is an emphasis on hope and flourishing that can happen with or without regards to marriage. Can you speak on, just like how you've dealt with what I think are at times slanderous statements against Revoice, but also just how you parse through that tension?
Yeah, I mean, there's a sense in which, like, Scripture mandates celibacy for all people outside marriage, and so there's a sense in which that's not a double standard. What becomes a double standard, and therefore what makes something like the phrase mandated celibacy feel burdensome, is if along with that restriction comes a culture in which flourishing is not possible if you are not married, which the be all end all of intimacy, of belonging, of romance is this heightened romantic fulfillment. Then if you are a gay teen and you're just coming to terms with your sexuality, you are going to experience your future differently than a straight teen is going to experience thinking about the future. No one knows if they're going to get married or not, but at least for straight folks, they know that it's likely in the cards in some way. Not always. But for gay teens who have no desire to pursue an opposite sex marriage, they know that they're just, unless society changes, unless our Christian cultural structures change, there's going to be an element of loneliness, of solitude, of being unsupported that's going to be in their future. And when you couple that deep burden with this phrase of mandated celibacy, that's when it starts to feel unfair. And so I think it's really important to call the church to develop better structures of support for people who are not married, who are unmarried, so that they can envision without having to think too hard. Like for some of us, it's easier to use our imaginations than others. And for gay folks, you got to use your imagination quite a bit to imagine in a lot of ways what it looks like to flourish. And at some point, the imagination just becomes fantasy land because we know, this is just not going to happen. Too much change has to happen before this can actually take place. And so that's really what we need to be calling the church to resolve, so that phrases like mandated celibacy don't feel as burdensome. Because until that does change, there will be a tension between the expectation that we put on people. If mandated celibacy means no intimacy, I mean, where's the life in that? There is no life in that. But if mandated celibacy actually says nothing about how much relational intimacy you are going to have in your life, then that is a different question.
Yeah, that's right. So right.
I don't know if that answers what you're getting at.
No, it does. I'm completely with you. I'm just I mean, I live in a community house, so I feel like my life's desire is to try to make community for the Christian church more accessible.
Love
and so
it.
for straight or otherwise Christians, there's a lot of joy here. And I'm just processing through, we're interviewing some Side X folks right now. And so I'm just like, where you discussed your experience in terms of fluidity. They put it often in the language of transformation or even sanctification at times, or change in general. And I think they're worried that it's kind of this, I think, unfortunate defensive reflex that, like, oh, by making more room for celibacy or encouraging flourishing there, we're not giving people the other hope for more what we would call mixed orientation marriages, but people saying, oh, if I'm gay, I can't imagine experience a one-woman orientation. I've maybe not heard stories about it.
Yeah.
And so it's just like, it's just difficult to cultivate a varied imagination with that.
Yeah. So they're operating under the impression, and which is accurate, that marriage is a good.
Yeah.
Right? Marriage is a good thing. And so they're raising the question, why should gay people not be curious, at least, about what it would look like for them to be able to experience that good? And I think that can be a legitimate question to ask and a legitimate, motivator to explore. I think to the extent that they're completely, to the extent that our past of latching onto marriage as a solution isn't examined, and that, there's just that whole history, the ex-gay history, that we have to remember as part of our history. Like, this is part of our North American evangelical history, part of our identity. And so if that awareness is not there, then it's inevitably going to be expressed in some really toxic ways. Even if the the motive is this, we want to shine light on this good thing and explore ways that might be a pathway forward for some gay people.
I think you're right, but then at least some of them will then move, because they're still Side X. Some of them still think being straight is the ideal.
We're all straight but broken.
Yeah, is the ideal, and some of them still want people to become heterosexual. So you're right, but then some of them have deeper goals or other ways of doing it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it's like this starts getting into what is the meaning of sexuality itself, and I have thoughts about that. I mean, I think in terms of just how do you put it? So I talk sometimes in terms of first creation and second creation. Okay. So first creation is this creation that we're in right now. Second creation is new creation, heaven. There's a sense in which first creation's sexuality is heterosexual. Like it's aimed towards procreation. It's within the context of an opposite sex marriage. And so I kind of get where they're coming from in that. But sexuality is tied to all kinds of other aspects of what it means to be human, including just what I think of, as the perception and admiration of beauty. Yeah. And so I think it's helpful to think through sexuality in those terms as well. And I think that's the part that gets to be really fruitful for us as gay people who are not straight, don't have a straight sexuality, where we have tools within our own experience to think through more creatively what does it look like to recognize beauty in others, in God, and to want to see ourselves to be, to yearn for that, to connect with that, in some sense to be united with it. So there's this union. It's not procreational sexual union, but a spiritual union of sorts. This is David and Jonathan's hearts being knit together. This is ultimately us as believers being united in Christ and found in Him. And then I think it's hinted at in the new creation, where the king, the earthly, the heavenly city, descends and is united with the new creation. So there's this symbolism of a union that happens in the new creation as well, that we're all looking forward to. So I don't know if the paradigm that these Side X folks are operating out of has that rich of an understanding of sexuality. It sounds like
I would say
it's
typically
very
no.
much no. It's very much sex is here and now, and it's heterosexual in nature. There is no other function for sex.
Yes.
It's also good, so it should be something you want.
Yes.
But want within the right bounds. And if you're not wanting it, then you're giving up on God's best for you.
Yes.
And I just think that's very short-sighted.
I admit I haven't. David Frank has talked to more Side X people than I have in my life.
Okay.
But I will say the ones that I have talked to, they typically seem to have. They're not very nuanced and relatively simplistic ways of conceiving of sex and also Christian ethics. Like it's more like the Bible says this, so this is possible. Or the Holy Spirit changed people in the past through healing, so now we expect healing in this way for this thing now. It's so, I would say typically more simple or direct sort of interpretation frameworks.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
That's my experience as well.
Yeah.
You talked about, I appreciated that you talked about our North American kind of Christian identity and what we have to deal with. And one, that is an identity we share. And there's identity gets talked about in a lot of different ways. I'm particularly interested in how you and /Revoice discern through the pros and cons about thinking about our sexual experiences through identity politics. That is focusing on the ways that we are marginalized and kind of pushing for our freedom as a marginalized community whose voices or perspectives are not valued or seen. Do you see any risks with this approach, or other pictures, other parts of the picture aside from identity politics for seeking flourishing as side B?
And part of this is just the use of the terminology, which is labeled identity politics in the U.S., like LGBT, become subsumed in U.S. identity politics. So, yeah.
I mean, I guess someone could look at what is happening at Revoice and think through the lens of identity politics that they can they can explain everything that's happening through that lens. That's not how I think about it. I think of just the reality that gay people in conservative churches are a marginalized people. Like that's a biblical category that Scripture gives us to work with. I don't have to go to identity politics to hear about marginalization. I can look in the Old Testament and see how the Israelites treated the foreigners in their midst, or see how the occupying powers treated the Israelites. Like oppression is everywhere in the Old Testament, and so. I feel like I have always had a really deep sense of justice and, things being fair. And one of the things that just gets me really angry is to see mistreatment of a group of people by Christians. And so it doesn't even have to be mistreatment. It can be a content ignorance and a lack of curiosity about the different things that are different. And so to the extent that is in the majority, so to speak, then pain and suffering will be the result. And that's just sad. And I feel like that's something that we need to mourn, something that we need to be able to voice, give a name. But again, you asked about the pitfalls, the dangers. I think we need to be able to move on. And realize that yes, it's important to the stages of grief. There are stages for a reason. And I think really one of the things that is really most important is ultimately realizing the union of the church as a whole, and what it looks like as sexual minorities who are at varying phases of having our sexuality integrated into our faith, but hopefully farther along than we were years ago, being able to take that sense of integration back into our churches, back into our faith communities, and not be content to silo ourselves and around people that are just like us, but to think of ways that it actually enrich the kingdom of God as a whole, the church as a whole, the Big C church, by our unique experience, and not just by experience in itself, but for our experience in the way it's being redeemed. So the way my sexuality is redeemed, and the way my sexuality is redeemed leads me to approach relationships a particular way, approach the good, seeing the good in my sibling in a particular way. And I feel like that's a really unique gift that we as sexual minorities have for the church, and that we need to be exercising that and blessing our communities around us with those gifts. And it can be hard because 9 times out of 10 it's not going to be noticed. But I mean, you still do it. You still, that's what we're called to. We're called to be a functioning member of the body of Christ. And we need to work through our grief, our trauma. And some people, they just don't get very far, and that's fine. But we need to make sure that we're being pulled in that direction, I think.
It's interesting. I think noticing there's almost you talk about the stages of grief. There's kind of this like stages of coming out and becoming side B of like, you're like, oh, there's this whole community and different language that's been developed, and usually a season of kind of hyper attention to your sexuality. And eventually seasons, as you said, of experience, like, oh, it kind of recedes and it's not even a part of your
There's
experience.
almost a cage stage style, cage stage phase, where you're just like, I mean, I went through it. But I think there are seasons of further stability beckoning us forward, I think. And those include greater integration within the larger body of Christ for the sake of the kingdom.
Yeah, amen.
My last question, it was interesting to hear about your kind of own intellectual roots in this conversation, and makes me actually more interested to go back to your book that you wrote in 2017 too. I was just reading some of the kind of description text and like, oh, this looks like great stuff. So increasingly there's projects like the Reformation Project that are advancing alternative theologies and biblical arguments even, that I would say undermine a traditional sexual ethic, and ultimately, which I would say undermines the flourishing of Christians with LGBTQ experiences as they advance. Those ones are advancing like side A affirming arguments. So the first year at Revoice, there was a workshop on like understanding the Leviticus passages that I thought was so helpful, specifically around sexuality, homosexual activity, and there's a whole thing with how that got reacted to by some people in my denomination. But anyways, we've been thinking that the Side B community does need this ongoing theological development. Spiritual friendship is semi-defunct, and even the apologetics within it. How are you thinking about this need, and is Revoice a place for that?
Absolutely. And I think you'll see, I don't know when, but soon, I think you'll see additional resources coming out from addressing that particular need. One of our core values from the beginning has been the value of discipleship. And so for us, that means, what does it look like to not just provide a space for belonging? That's important, and you got to start there. But where does that belonging lead? What growth emerges out of that sense of belonging? And for sexual minorities who adhere to a traditional sexual ethic, that has to involve some form of grounding in their convictions, and being able to relate those convictions to the way that God created the world as a whole. And so, very much interested in whatever resources can be produced, whatever initiatives we can begin, whatever ways we can just resource our community to become more grounded in our faith. I mean, I have a PhD in New Testament, so we're talking like formation here. It's really close to my heart.
Yeah.
And I think we're really poised, especially right now internally, in terms of staffing and gift sets and everything. We're really poised to begin offering some really exciting things.
I especially look forward for like queer people to be writing this, because right now a lot of the side B resources I see are like mostly, a lot of them are straight people, like Preston Sprinkle, great, love straight allies.
Yep.
But it's a little bit different when it can be different. It's different how they process things, how they put things together, the frameworks they use, and also it's easy for me to point to side A resources written by queer people like Karen Keene or Reformation Project, Matthew Vines, or others. What is his name? Boswell from the past. He was
Boswell.
Was it John? I think he'd be called queer now, even though I don't think it was necessarily a category they used then. But but then side B resources, there's fewer, and they're usually more pastoral, but a little bit less relating to, like, maybe you might say dogmatic theology or apologetic postures or biblical interpretation. Like, they touch that.
Yep.
But like Tenderness, which I love, by Eve Tushnet, Spiritual Friendship by Wesley Hill, they're not exactly that. They're more pastoral in orientation. So I'm hoping for that.
No, I agree, and I think that there's helpful. I don't want to use the word criticism, but like there's helpful critique of side A that has not happened, of affirming folks. There's work to be done.
There is work to be done. Yeah.
Yeah.
Even to defend side B is like a way of thinking against the more conservative types, what we might call side Y or side X. That's still work that needs to be done, like around desire, around change or transformation or whatever. Like the field is, what can I say? The field is ready to be like worked on.
What I'm wrestling with though is are anybody actually going to listen?
Maybe not, but I don't know.
Our community will listen.
Sure.
I think our community will listen, and then that's all we have to worry about. Just be compelling to the people that we're reaching, and then let the Spirit do the rest. Because unity is a work of the Spirit to begin with. Yeah. So all we have to do is be faithful, and
yeah. It's a good humbling reminder that I need. Well, thanks for your time, Nate, and
of course,
and for your work over these years. This podcast wouldn't be here if it weren't for Revoice, probably. TJ sent me, articles to consider back in the day from Spiritual Friendship, but being at Revoice with the community and feeling, especially that first one, just an incredible sense of hospitality and belonging and welcome in the Spirit. It was beautiful and brought a sense of solidarity and care for the church that really stirred me on in a number of ways. So thank you, and I look forward to being together in Columbus this summer.
Can't wait. About 3 months away.
Yeah, it's coming.
Okay. Bye, y'all.
Bye.
Good to be with you guys.
Hey, listeners. I want to let you know about the Communion and Shalom Patreon. Joining the Patreon community not only supports this podcast, but gives you the opportunity to listen to bonus content, give input on future episodes, and submit questions for a patron-only Q&A. We're so thankful for the support and encouragement from so many listeners, and we hope that this podcast continues to be meaningful to you.